death of Giancarlo Rastelli. Indeed, he passed away exactly in 1970. What I would like to do today is to divide my presentation in two parts. My personal belief on this giant of cardiac surgery. And the second one will be a film made by the Mayo Clinic on the life of Giancarlo Rastelli when he was working there. So let me summarize briefly the curriculum vitae of Giancarlo Rastelli. Giancarlo Rastelli was born in June 23, 1933, and achieved the graduation in medicine at Parma, at Parma University with laude. And on September 1, 1961, he was a winner of a NATO major bursary to the Mayo Clinic, Rochester in Minnesota, USA. I must say that I did the same in 77. The NATO Junior Bursary is the Council of National Research Bursary. And that he started his venture in America. He married Anna in August 12, 1964, and back for the honeymoon, he realized that he was affected by Hodgkin disease. So he worked strongly in the next 6 years, despite the disease, and invented in 64, 67, new surgical techniques, those, by the way, that he was considered a pioneer in congenital heart disease repair of AV canal, repair of truncus arteriosus, repair of transposition of great arteries, that were congenital heart disease really fatal, not available for surgery and for correction there. So let me show you, this is the Mayo Clinic, an old card that I took back when I was visiting Mayo Clinic in 74. This is the famous paper on surgical anatomy of a complete atrioventricular canal. Of course, to repair congenital heart disease, there is a need to know the anatomy. And this is the beginning of his history that he did with Jack Titus, that was the director of experimental anatomic pathology at that time, and with John Kirkland. John Kirkland, you know, very famous indeed, cardiac surgeon that started the surgery with extracorporeal circulation there in 54. Okay, these are the three types of complete AV canal. There is a cleft here with the anterior leaflet attached to the crest of the ventricular septum. The second one, there is a cleft, but there is an overriding of these leaflet, anterior leaflet, attached to an anomalous muscle on the right ventricle. And third, there is a free floating of the anterior leaflet. This is a major, of course, surgical challenge that is solved at that time, starting from the knowledge of anatomy. The second one was the operation of a correction of a truncus arteriosus, and he did with Dwight McGould this publication in JAMA at that time, but at the beginning of the first publication of any these malformation repair was done in the Mayo Clinic proceedings first, and then in general international journal. So this is operation of truncus arteriosus. Operation was to repair the reconstituting the continuity between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery separated from the aorta, and that was achieved with the homograft from cadaver. And this is the repair. repair, of course, closing the ventricular septal digit, reconnecting the aorta with the left ventricle, and then by a homograft, a conduit, the continuity between the right ventricle and pulmonary artery. Okay, and finally, transposition of great artery. This is the first time that the adjective anatomic correction was introduced, because indeed he was able to establish the continuity of the aorta with the left ventricle, the transposed aorta with the left ventricle, and because of the presence of pulmonary stenosis, again, the continuity between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery. Of course, in this particular case, without closing the ventricular septal defect, because there was an internal sort of a conduit in between the left ventricle and the aorta. Okay, this study, anatomical studies, were awarded at the American College of Cardiology in 1968 at the meeting in San Francisco. It's funny that indeed I was in San Francisco 12 years later and presenting the pathological anatomy of pulmonary artery atresia with ventricular septal defect, the most severe form of tetralogy of Fallot. I remember that time when I mentioned the study of Matteo Realdo Colombo, and I spoke in Latin. Of course, everybody was, of course, they were excited me speaking, but in Latin. It was a sort of surprise. In 1968, after the diagnosis, of course, of Hodgkin disease, when he was already he was affected by the disease, he was nominated chief of experimental cardiac surgery at Mayo. Because of his disease, of course, he could not anymore do the surgery in humans, but he did in animals, again exploring the possibility of using the conduit from the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery. But there is a novelty here. In 1969, he starts a new venture on single ventricle repair. It's nice because this is exactly the topic that Professor Giovanni Stellin will speak later. But at that time, the two alternatives with arteriopulmonary, of course, communication and connection, or ventricular septation. He was exploring the possibility to repair the single ventricle, separating the single ventricle into parts. And unfortunately, in February 2, he had a relapse of Hodgkin disease and died in February 2, 1970. By the way, that day, he had organized a meeting exactly on the project of a single ventricle repair. Okay, look at here. This is a photo taken in San Francisco when he was awarded for the anatomical studies of a partial form of AV canal. And this you see in the center here. This is Dwight McGoon, and this is Jack Titus, the pathologist there. So it's incredible enough because this is a surgeon that received an award for anatomical studies. Anatomical studies are indeed a surgical anatomy. Well, I want to draw your attention to this card that was sent to Umberto Squarcia from Rastelli exactly that March. You see here, 7 March 1968, at the meeting of the American College in San Francisco. And you see here that Rastelli is sending a message, come on boy here, there is bread and glory for everybody here. And roll up your sleeves. But what is funny is that there is a signature also of Sergio Della Volta, our you know that Sergio Della Volta passed away recently. He was our master in cardiology indeed. This is the lab that was set up for him in experimental cardiac surgery in animals. This is he is working here indeed with a patient, in this particular case. At that time, very young, when it was possible for him to make surgery in humans, but he invented new techniques, innovation of techniques for repair of congenital heart disease, and applied him in humans already. Okay, and this is the univentricular heart repair that he was trying to investigate. You see here is an old specimen of our collection that underwent later on human transplant. And you see here the septation of the single ventricle dividing in two parts, left and right. And that is opposite to the Fontan, alternative to the Fontan procedure, the topic that Professor Rastelli will be dealing with later. Okay, so let me make some comments, final comments. This is something that he wrote in 1961. He was very Catholic, and he, before leaving for the Mayo Clinic and America, he said, it was, of course, it was written at that time in Italian, but I translate. I always believed that the first charity a patient should receive from the doctor is the love of science. I want to finish my first part of the presentation, the second one will be a film, saying that indeed Rastelli is a myth as a surgeon, but he is a myth as a person. And this is his legacy. He was for sure a pioneer, a pillar of surgical anatomy for treatment of congenital heart disease at the Mayo Clinic. At that time, don't forget that in the 60s, the Mayo Clinic was the mecca of cardiac surgery. Can I add that he is indeed an example of Italian brain abroad? Many surgeons like Giovanni Stellin have been abroad for a long time, and we will be speaking about later, but they were back. For him, it was not possible to be back. And I must say that indeed, again, this is another example of when nobody is a prophet in his country. He, for sure, is an inventor of genius surgical techniques, and this will be surgical techniques that have been a milestone in the history of cardiac surgery. But more, he was a man of charity. He was an ensign of belief on science. Let me finish this part quoting Pope John Paul II, 1992, when he wrote a letter to our rector at that time. 92 was indeed the fourth century anniversary of the Galileo Galilei chair at the University of Padua. He arrived here exactly in October 1992. Faith and science should contribute to the discovery of the truth. This is the legacy of Rastelli, Giancarlo Rastelli, to all of us. So thank you. And now the film coming from the Mayo Clinic.
The clinic was home to giants in the field of cardiology, including Dr. Jeremy Swan, a master of the latest techniques in cardiac catheterization, Dr. Dwight Magoon, performing new operations to repair and replace heart valves, and Dr. John Kirkland, a pioneer in open heart surgery. So when a promising young physician in Parma, Italy, was awarded a scholarship to study cardiovascular surgery at a medical center of his choosing, it's no wonder he chose Mayo Clinic. Dr. Giancarlo Rastelli was 28 years old, handsome, likable, enthusiastic, and brilliant. Growing up in Parma, he was known for his generosity and compassion. One of his friends recalled, he had chosen at a very young age to become a doctor. It was a choice that perfectly blended together his desire to give to others. Rastelli was thrilled at the opportunity to learn from the legendary Dr. Kirkland and assist in his open-heart surgeries. In September of 1961, he sailed from Italy to begin his fellowship at Mayo Clinic. "My America," he said, "starts there." Rochester exactly fit Dr. Rastelli's image of a typical American town. "Here they teach you everything," he wrote. "You get your hands in, and they show you where you need to cut, where you need to look." Dr. Rastelli was assigned to the new cardiac catheterization laboratory, helping Dr. Swan diagnose patients. "I am now in charge of doing the most complicated cases of cardiac catheterization," he wrote home, "with Swan at my back, always looking on angelically and full of advice." He also had the opportunity to assist in Dr. Kirkland's operating room in more ways than one. When a vital piece of equipment failed during surgery, Dr. Rastelli quickly repaired it, saving the day. He reported home, tongue-in-cheek, "I've gained enormous success as an electrician." John described the atmosphere at Mayo as very collegial. At the end of the day, Dr. Kirkland would gather his team in the cafeteria to analyze the day's operations. "Our suggestions are taken into account," he wrote, "and any good ideas are immediately adopted." When his scholarship year ended, Dr. Rastelli was pleased to receive a staff position. There was only one thing missing from John's life. 3 years after arriving at Mayo, he made his first trip home to Italy and resumed his courtship of a talented artist named Anna Angileri. They had met years before on the ski slopes. Anna recalled, "I've never since met such a beautiful creature, both inside and out." She remembered saying a prayer that day, "Please let me have this man for my husband." In August of 1964, John and Anna were married in a beautiful medieval abbey near Parma. "I'm so proud of being his wife I could cry. Everything is marvelous." Soon after his return, John reported to the Mayo Building for the required annual medical exam. John was an athletic outdoorsman, seemingly in perfect health, but the routine chest X-ray showed a small tumor between his lungs. The diagnosis was Hodgkin's lymphoma, a rare form of cancer. Dr. Rastelli immediately plunged into an ambitious research project. He focused on a congenital heart defect, difficult to correct surgically, with a high mortality rate. Mayo Clinic maintained an extensive pathological archive containing tissue and organs removed in surgeries and autopsies. Dr. Rastelli meticulously examined more than 50 hearts with this malformation. As a result, he identified 3 distinct variations of the defect, each requiring a different surgical approach. It became known as the Rastelli classification. Leading myself to an Italian family that brought their little boy for a heart operation. Stand next to him, smile, take his hand, treat him like a brother with a common destiny. In 1968, 7 years after arriving at Mayo for a 1-year fellowship, Dr. Rastelli was appointed head of cardiovascular research at St. Mary's Hospital. That year, he and Dr. Magoon took an exhibition on the Rastelli classification to the annual meeting of the American Medical Association. It was honored with a gold medal. But Dr. Rastelli was already hard at work on a challenging new project, devising a way to surgically repair a serious heart defect called truncus arteriosus. In this condition, a baby is born missing a major blood vessel in the heart, with a hole between 2 of the heart's chambers. Rastelli worked in the laboratory day and night to develop and test an innovative solution to patch the opening in the heart and redirect blood flow through a new conduit formed from donated tissue. In July of 1968, a case of truncus arteriosus was successfully repaired in a Mayo operating room using the Rastelli procedure. Surgeons found the technique useful in correcting a number of congenital heart defects. In the brief span of his career, Dr. Rastelli had collaborated on nearly 100 papers. A New York foundation had granted him nearly $250,000 to pursue this ambitious goal. On the front page, the employee newspaper carried a moving tribute from Dr. Kirkland. Dr. Rastelli was a sensitive and kind and happy individual, he wrote. He enriched all of our lives. The serenity and confidence with which Dr. Rastelli faced life and death, literally, is the greatest of the many things that he taught me. A plaque in Dr. Rastelli's memory was dedicated at St. Mary's Hospital from the surgical residents who regarded him highly as a surgeon, creative artist, teacher, and friend. Rastelli is permanently established in the daily vocabulary of cardiologists and heart surgeons all over the world.